Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside Cuban Missile Crisis, the Threshold of Nuclear War. This is a game designed by Kerry Anderson and published by Microgame Design Group. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 was a very hot flashpoint. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and we did not fall into either full-scale world war or a full-scale nuclear holocaust. This game is going to go and explore that 13-day tense situation that there was a lot of political wrangling, there was a lot of saber rattling, and things got very, very tense. This is a Ziploc game, so there's no back of the box, so we're going to dive right in and take a look at all the components you get with the game. And we have our cover sheet, and often on the back of these we have player aid cards, but this one does not have that. Our rule book, the player aid cards, actual cards that you'll be using in the game. We got about 4 sheets of cards, 2 counter sheets, and our maps. So let's set up the map and take a closer look at the game. And we'll take a look at the map that comes with the game. Actually, there's going to be 2 11 by 17 inch maps that you're going to be joining together. They do overlay one on top of the other. Now these maps do have the white border. You can easily cut that off so that way you can better overlay the maps one on top of the other to match them up. But for right now, I'm just going to leave them side by side. You can see the different air bases over here: Homestead, MacDill, McCoy, Key West, and then USA and at sea boxes are on the right-hand side. The political opinion track is here, the game turn track, and then you have the legend, which will explain to you the different types of terrain on the map. You have the USS Independence and the USS Enterprise carrier groups that'll be at sea. A counter legend is at the bottom of the map. The unit types in the game, unit sizes, and then the air transport track is in the bottom right. And we'll take a look at the player aids that come with the game. The first one is the combat results table, which will give you an explanation of all the results of combat. The terrain effects chart is down at the bottom. And as I said before, we have the key for the terrain effects chart on the map itself. Here's going to give you the information for movement and combat, how each of those pieces of terrain affects those. Then you have the political value chart at the bottom right. On the back side, we have the nuclear arsenal chart, the counterforce strength chart, and the counterforce results table. Next, we have the American tables, where you get the American random events and the results based on the die rolls. At the bottom, you have the convoy intercept table. On the back, you have the war in Turkey table, as well as the war in Europe table, and the explanation of the DRMs at the bottom. On the next sheet, you have the communist tables. You have the communist random events table, as well as the missile activation table at the bottom. And the same tables on the back that we saw for the US, war in Turkey and war in Europe, as well as the explanation of the DRMs at the bottom. And we'll take a look at the cards that come with the game. We're going to look at the US sheets first. There are 2 of these, and these are perforated cardstock that you'll be punching out and using in play during the game. At the top left, we have the number that tells you what the DEFCON state has to be to play that card. In this instance, 4, and over here, 3 for these right 2 cards. You also have an event here that will take place, and then the entities that are involved, this will affect their political opinion track. You have NATO, the Organization of American States, the United Nations, the US, and the USSR. And on the second sheet, we have more cards, and you can see the higher DEFCON numbers, 3, 2, and DEFCON 1. And the same for the Soviet cards. Instead of having the DEFCON state like the US does with DEFCON 1 through 5, you have 3 different states for the communist forces: peace, crisis, which is C, or W, which is war. But you can see that these cards have the same type of information that you'll find on the US cards. Next, we'll take a look at the counter sheets that come with the game. These are the US forces. We have Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Navy forces, as well as some administrative counters and Soviet tankers at the bottom right. And on the next sheet, we have the Soviet forces, which don't look too impressive at first because you only see a few of them, but that's because everything is fog of war. They're going to be played blank side up, and then on the back side is where you're going to tell what the units are. So there's going to be a fog of war in the game where you're not going to know what forces are where until you engage. Now we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 14-page rule book. We started with the introduction, the game components, explaining all the counters, the game map, things like that, all the units that are involved, as well as the player aid cards and the cards themselves. the terminology, and then an explanation of the fog of war, which we saw when we looked at the counters. And we have definitions that are used in the game, as well as naval effects, abbreviations in use, and the preparation for play. Then we get to the sequence of play on page 3. Accidents are explained. There are going to be a lot of things that can happen. You may shoot down a U-2 spy plane. You may have to take out another unit, things like that. And that's how things can rapidly spiral out of control. Then we have political events, alert status, and the political event cards. Remember, we talked about that with the DEFCON state for the U.S. and the war footing for the Soviets, whether it's peace, crisis, or war. And that card can only be played based on if it is set for that DEFCON level or that war footing level. Then we have mobilization, off-board conflicts. Then we get into strategic movement, airborne and amphibious assaults, movement itself, all the different aspects of that, stacking, zones of control, supply, airborne supply, supply effects, determining supply. Then we get into combat, multiple unit and multiple hex unit combat, combat results, retreat, air power and how that is expressed in the game in combat, air bases, air missions, interceptor air superiority, ground transport, bombardment, things like that, interdiction, reconnaissance, staging, all the different types of air missions you can run. Then you also have SAMs and AA fire, of course, because if you're going to have aircraft, you have to have anti-aircraft. Then we get to nuclear warfare, tactical nuclear weapons, air attacks, nuclear destruction and radiation, theater nuclear weapons, and strategic nuclear weapons, as well as counter-value strike and counter-force strikes. Then we get to the victory determination and then the scenarios. Op Plan 312, which is a full airstrike, is the first scenario. It only lasts one turn. Then we have Op Plan 316, which is the invasion. This is set 7 days after the airstrike, which was the first scenario, which was one turn. And the U.S. invades the island with the intent of removing the communist government, and that lasts 7 turns. Then we have the designer's notes, and then we have a look at the back page of the rules, which has some of the tables that we have already on the player aid cards. And that is a look at everything you get inside of Cuban Missile Crisis, the Threshold of Nuclear War. This is a game designed by Kerry Anderson and published by Microgame Design Group. This was an incredibly tense piece of history in 1962. And thankfully, we can game this out and not have to suffer the ill effects of what may have happened during that conflict. I've always found this to be an interesting piece of history because it's so recent in our history and how close we came to just a terrible situation for the entire world as the U.S. and the Soviet Union faced off over these missiles in Cuba. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and things didn't get out of hand, but still, we can game it out here with this game, Cuban Missile Crisis. And I've talked about Kerry's games on the channel before. Always like his games. They're a lot of fun. They're not too complex. They're nice and light, medium complexity range. You know, usually 8 to 15 pages of rules, so not a lot to grok, and you can dig right in and using pretty much the types of rules you already are familiar with, just with his own unique twists. I like the fact that you've got fog of war in the game. Now, playing at solitaire, it's going to be interesting how you can do that. These cards don't have to be used in the game, so that part of it alone, you don't have to worry about for playing solitaire. But when you're playing solitaire with setting up these units, you want to make sure you have a good dispersal of your units across the board. So that may take a little finagling, but not too difficult to do. I'm sure it'll be real interesting. Plus, when I put something down face down, I'll probably forget what it is anyway. Looking forward to playing the solitaire and face-to-face in the future. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you'd be curious about this one. If you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.